Hello and welcome to the Down Under Visa Philippines to Australia podcast series. I'm your host, Jeff Harvey, registered migration agent with Down Under Visa, the premier Australian migration agent in Manila, Philippines, specialising in visas for Australian Filipino couples. We hope you enjoy this podcast and hope it proves useful to you. Please feel free to share this with your partner and with any of your interested friends. Let's get started. Okay, today's topic is Filipinos and their parents for Australian Filipino couples. Filipinos and their obligation to parents is something very much expected by their society, and this is often a very direct contrast to Australian society, and look, it's not always easy to understand and to accept by an Australian man romantically involved with a Filipino lady. Now, I'll attempt to explain this to help those in Australian-Filipino relationships, not only to understand how it works, but also to explain the cultural differences between Australia and Philippines when it comes to parents and the obligation to parents to provide support. And look, I will state this right from the start for anyone who thinks I'm making judgments about who is right and who is wrong, that I am most definitely not doing this. My opinion is that there will always be two different viewpoints, and because there are two different cultural backgrounds in an Australian-Filipino relationship, and that both viewpoints should be respected. The way we grow up, the way we live our lives, we have very clear ideas in our mind of what is accepted, what is the right thing, what is the wrong thing, and situations like this, Australians and Filipinos will view this very, very differently. And look, the worst relationships are the ones where you have either one side or the other side dominating and the other one meekly just going along with whatever it is, tossing out everything that they believe in their heart to be true. The best relationships are where you compromise, where you have a happy medium, where you do understand and respect the feelings and the sensibilities and the way that person was brought up. That is ideal, and I hope that you can, anyone listening to this, I hope you can work towards that rather than either bullying or being bullied, basically. Now, Australian and Filipino obligations to parents. Now, Philippine society is made up of a complex family and kinship group obligations based on who owes who, i.e. who has been kind to who or done you favours and therefore whom you owe. A debt of gratitude is established, known as utang na loob. Let's spell L-O-O-B. I used to think that was pronounced oo, so when I first saw that I thought it was utang na loob, but it's not, it's loob. Now, Australians can actually relate to this very well. An Aussie who forgets those whom he owes, well, we consider him a bit of a mug, or that's probably the polite version. There are a few other fairly choice expletives that we put on somebody to whom we've been good to them. When we need them, we don't see them for a cloud of dust. They look at it exactly the same in the Philippines. In the Philippines, they say somebody who does that, they say they're walang hiya, which means shameless. And old-style Aussie values are basically exactly the same in this area. The main difference between the cultures is that whilst we generally, although not always, we generally love our parents in Australia and we will help them out when they get old. We just don't feel that we owe our parents for raising us, and our parents generally agree with this. That's a very, 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 very big difference. And it comes from, like I've explained this in other articles, especially on the Filipino Wives site, www.filipinowives.com.au. there's a lot of information on there. I used to write articles there when I had a little bit more time on my hands, as I don't have as much now. I used to write a lot of articles there, a lot of them on cultural differences, the object being to try to help those who are in Australian-Filipino relationships to overcome some of those areas which lead to misunderstandings and fights and squabbles. Big difference is, so the Philippines tends to be an interdependent society. People depend on one another and they're okay about that. Australian society, Australia was formed by those pioneering types who grabbed themselves a bullock dray and stuck an axe and a rifle and a shovel and a wife in the back of the bullock dray and headed off over the mountains and found themselves a bit of bush, and they did it all by themselves, and they did it independently, and they valued that. Those of my generation and older, we tend to be much the same. In the Philippines, not so. People are dependent on each other, and they're quite okay about that. That's the difference. Now, I'm just going to read a little bit of something for you. There was a wonderful book written by a Persian poet in the early 1900s called Khalil Gibran. This book's called The Prophet. Some of you may know it. It's just a little book, but it was full of wisdom, and from a particular small chapter entitled Children. They say, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you." Now, whilst your average Aussie may not have read that, it's pretty much what we all think. We know in ourselves that, we bring our kids into the world, but we don't own them. We want to send them off into the world. We want them strong and independent, and we don't see it as being that they owe us something. In the Philippines they do. Anyway, I'll keep reading. Now, we parents, we made the decision to make babies, and it's our job to help them through life and not the other way round. Life moves forwards and not backwards. Most Australians are very reluctant to take charity, full stop, and even less likely from our kids. And an obligation to parents to provide support simply doesn't exist. For myself, I'd be off to buy a rope and a rickety stool before I took a hand out from my children. My mother was exactly the same. But we would go shopping. Mila would buy large quantities of things, and 5-kilo bags of potatoes and large pumpkins and various things like that. And my mother would notice this, and she would point it out. She didn't like it. That's very much the Aussie way when we, at all stages, but certainly when we get old. But Filipinos look at it differently. Now, they grow up being reminded constantly of how a good kid grows up and can't wait for the time when they can start working and sending money back to their parents. The more they give, the more they're admired by Filipino society, and many Filipino looks to their kids as the answer to their financial woes. And this starts from a young age. Kids of school age are told how they must study hard so that one day they can have a good job and take care of their parents. Every relative will tell them that. You must make sure you study, because one day you need to take care of your parents. Don't forget about your parents. Now, they're told constantly of their parents' sacrifice, and told stories of virtuous young people who did the right thing by their similarly virtuous parents. And when they have success, they're reminded constantly it only happened because of their parents' sacrifice. You might see, if you have Filipino friends, relatives, etc., on your Facebook, you will see the occasional one profusely thanking their parents and saying, this success was due to my parents, and that I think constantly that I must work hard because I need to justify everything that my parents did for me. It's very much a constant. And by contrast, you will hear the stories of the irresponsible and selfish kids who grew up, maybe dropped out of college because they got pregnant and then went on to become a further burden to their parents, or otherwise they went on to become successful and then forgot all about the old folks. You will hear a lot of that. Again, anyway, I will continue. Most of what I need to say is right here. The family tumbai and the family saint. Many large families have at least one of the above, in addition to those who generally do their bit to help the parents. Now, I wonder sometimes if the kids all get together and draw straws and decide who's going to be which. One of them becomes the family layabout, the tumbai. Now, that's the one who never gets a job ever, apart from the occasional odd job where the money goes on alcoholic beverages, and you can easily recognise them because they're fond of napping during the day after a long tiring morning of doing nothing. And one of them becomes the family saint. Now, that's the one who invariably ends up working overseas as an overseas Filipino worker, or OFW. And they will effectively spend their entire working life earning money and sending it back to support the family and the parents in particular. And they will keep this up until they retire, often with no husband or kids. And yes, it's usually a girl who does this. My wife's family had the tumbai, and it had the family saint, and look, Irene was a wonderful woman. Unfortunately, she died in her late 40s. Didn't look after her health, so I've mentioned in other articles, if she attended to the fact she had high blood pressure, well, her kidneys wouldn't have factored in and she'd still be alive today. But she had spent her entire working life working overseas, first in Saudi Arabia, followed by Hong Kong, and then China. Now, she didn't marry, she never had kids, and whatever she earned she sent back, and the family sat there and took it, and they let her do it. And she died, to me, having had a fairly unfulfilled life personally, and I don't know, the only one who seemed to be overly concerned about this was me. I ended up matching her up with somebody, and unfortunately life was cut short. It happens. But I just think they should have earlier on said, okay, Irene, enough, you've done enough. I think you can start putting your money into a bank account and starting to do something about yourself. But they didn't, they just kept taking it. And I wasn't impressed then, I'm not impressed today. Anyway, reality of life in the Philippines. Now, I will always be an Australian in my thinking about this. I've told my kids that I want them all to have great lives, and this is a reward in itself for me. I won't change my view. I encourage them. I tell them. I say, look, you don't owe us anything. Study hard, work hard, get yourselves great lives. I hope they have better lives than us, and I hope they continue to love us and remember us and respect us, but they're not supporting us, I can tell you that. I will always look with disdain when I see those families. Not all of them. The ones who stop working sometimes when they're still in their early 30s or early 40s and still quite capable of working, and they stick their hands out to their children who are struggling to raise young families themselves. All those who, like my late sister-in-law, who never even got the chance to raise a family for themselves, but those where they're sacrificing and they're holding back and they're not doing the things that they really should be doing for themselves and for their own family and for their own future, so that one day they can retire comfortably and not struggling because they're constantly being reminded that they have an obligation to their family back in the Philippines. And I get particularly annoyed when you see those Look, it's one thing if there are elderly parents who do need support, and there's no question about it. This country doesn't have a fantastic pension system. So yeah, that I understand, but I don't understand when you get, parents in their 40s who were working, and as soon as their daughter, becomes an OFW, or as soon as their daughter marries a gullible Australian, they put their feet up and they stop working and they sit back and they expect to be supported. I don't understand that, and I never will. No time for that at all. And yes, I will always feel sorry for the family saint who lives their lives for others. Now, yes, I already explained about my sister-in-law. However, there are still some harsh realities of life for many people in the Philippines. Not everyone has the opportunity to put aside a healthy nest egg for their retirement. Sometimes it's through bad management, quite often it is, but sometimes it's just the reality of the cost of living and what they're able to earn with their particular profession. Not everybody is capable of becoming filthy rich. But yes, a lot of people, they spend their entire working lives barely making it to the next pay packet and having to do without so many things. And people can age fairly quickly when they do lead a hard life. Untreated medical conditions like hypertension, diabetes, poor nutrition, they can all take their toll. And people can age earlier than they normally would. They can be, pretty stuffed by the time they're 50 in many cases. And whilst there is a social security system in the Philippines, it's not. It's a bit like superannuation in Australia. The more you put in during a working life, the more you can take out in your retirement. Now, if you contributed nothing because you had none to spare, there is nothing available at the end. It is possible in some extreme cases to get a small amount, a small pension type of thing via the local barangay, if you can show hardship, if you can show you've got nothing else. But that might be only something like 1,500 pesos a month, which we all know that's not very much, so it's going to leave somebody in poverty. Now, under these circumstances, it would be a fairly hard-hearted adult who would do nothing to help out their parents. I can find no fault in reasonable support being provided. Now, something like even 10,000 pesos a month, that's only $250 Australian. I understand not all, but many Australians could manage that, and it would make a huge difference. It won't put anybody into a life of luxury, but it will if they continue to live simply. It'll help them through. So don't think I'm hard-hearted. We do a lot for relatives when needed. We have a house full of kids of poorer relatives, so we can give them a better start in life. We're up to 8 at the moment, and looking at 9 actually in about a month. A child isn't born yet. Her name will be Mary Ann, and we've actually talked the mother out of having an abortion. So the child will live, and the child will live with us. So that'll be child number 9. We do things like that. Happy to help kids. It's not their fault if they're in poverty. Not always parents or older person's fault for being in poverty, but sometimes, my goodness, sometimes it really is those who, if they put the same effort into working hard as they put into begging for handouts or gambling at the cockfights or whatever, they could probably do quite well for themselves. But kids certainly, no kid doesn't, no Filipino child should live in poverty by whatever, as Mr. Hawke said. So we help kids out a lot. But one thing I will not do is I will not pay anything to keep Tumbai in a sedentary existence. And I will always put my wife and kids first. I will never let them suffer because of some lazy relative who won't work. Now, what I have difficulty with are those who simply take advantage of the kindness of the kids and use emotional blackmail and the threat of public condemnation if they don't. Kids growing up with this constant pressure on them to know what is expected in the future, guilt being piled on over the years, and then later on encouraging girls to lie to their husbands and to sneak money out of the family bank accounts, to sneak off to relatives, and often, again, not just to sustain them, but to let them live a life of luxury. Families in Australia doing it tough and ending up with retirement age with nothing but a pension. And look, as far as I'm concerned, that's not right, and this will remain my view. Again, please understand I'm not condemning any particular culture. I am expressing an opinion, which I tend to express strongly. That is my way. But in any Australian-Filipino relationship, you don't expect that your wife will turn her back on parents who will otherwise go without food, go without medicine, won't be able to have electricity, etc., etc. But there's a big difference between that and just letting people supposedly share in the wealth of a foreigner. There's a big difference between encouraging somebody who was working to suddenly stop working because they can take advantage. Huge difference there. But anyway, talk about it and try and understand each other. Try and understand that Australians tend to be fiercely independent. Filipinos do not. We have different expectations. So try to strike a happy medium between you. Okay, thank you very much. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the Down Under Visa Philippines to Australia podcast series. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed and we hope you found this useful. Australian visas from the Philippines are not easy and the outcome matters, as you well know. Please feel free to contact us anytime if you need some further help. And we look forward to talking to you again next time. Bye-bye.